Welcome back. I was reviewing a particular script this week, one submitted through the usual channels, and what stopped me was not the betrayal itself, those are common enough, but the architecture of the response. The protagonist did not react. He documented, he filed, he collected, and then he mailed a card. You're watching His Eternal Diary.
The smell of October in that apartment was always coffee, and something slightly chemical, the kind of scent that lives in the grout lines of old tile floors and never fully leaves no matter how many times you mop. Elliot Crane had lived there for 4 years, and for 4 years he had cataloged that smell the way you catalog anything familiar, without thinking about it, the way your lungs catalog air. He noticed it only on certain mornings when the light came in at the wrong angle and the apartment felt temporary, like a stage set someone had forgotten to dismantle. That morning was one of those mornings. He was 33 years old. It was the 14th of October. His mother had already called twice before 7 a.m., which was standard. Her calls were not the warm kind. She did not sing. She did not cry. She did not linger. She would dial, say his name, say the date as though confirming a transaction, tell him that the wire had been sent and that she loved him, and then she would hang up. It had been this way since he was 19, since the first time she had tried to give him a birthday gift, and he had asked her instead to send money directly to his account. She had adapted. She always adapted. $3,400, same amount every year. Adjusted twice for inflation over 14 years, otherwise unchanged. His mother was nothing if not consistent. He stood at the kitchen counter and let the coffee machine do its work, watching the slow, dark drip collect in the glass carafe. And he thought about nothing in particular. That was the specific texture of that morning, a blankness, a low hum of ordinary life, the kind of day that feels like it will remain exactly what it appears to be. A birthday. A wire confirmation on his phone. Coffee. Vivian was still in the bedroom. None. He could hear the specific rhythm of her breathing through the half-open door, deep and unbroken, the sleep of someone with no immediate concerns. She slept like that often. Elliot had always found it quietly remarkable that she could sleep so fully, so completely, in the middle of what he now understood to be a double life. He did not know that yet on that morning. He only knew the coffee, the light, the chemical smell, and the wire notification from his mother. He knew it 3 days later. The manner of knowing was unremarkable in its mechanics. He had logged into the joint savings account to transfer the $3,400 from his birthday fund into his individual investment account, something he did every year, routing the money toward a specific position he had already selected, a ritual that was half financial discipline and half superstition. He preferred to move birthday money intentionally. He had read once that the way you handle the first money you receive in a year sets the tone for everything that follows, and while he did not entirely believe this, he behaved as though he did. The account balance was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not empty. Just wrong by exactly the kind of amount that requires a second look rather than a first instinct of panic. The joint account, which should have held approximately $11,200 after the standard October contributions from both of them, held $8,061. He sat at his desk, the narrow one he kept in what Vivian called the study, and he called the second bedroom. And he opened the transaction history. He did this without a particular feeling. He was a certified financial forensics examiner. He had been consulting for the SEC's Enforcement Division for 3 years and for various corporate litigation teams for 5 years before that. When he encountered a number that did not align, he did not feel alarmed. He felt curious in the specific, methodical way of a person whose curiosity is a professional tool. A withdrawal. October 17th, $3,200. Point of sale, classified as retail. He looked at the date. 3 days after his birthday. 3 days after his mother's wire had landed in his personal account, visible on the shared banking app they both used, the app that showed the inflow, the amount. The notation, "Birthday from Mom." He stared at the screen for long enough that the display went dark. He did not call Vivian in from the other room. He did not take a breath. He did not feel the particular heat that rises in the chest when the mind is processing the mechanics of having been stolen from. He felt nothing in the immediate sense, because Elliot Crane had spent the better part of a decade training himself to recognize that the first moment of discovery is never the right moment for action. The first moment of discovery is for data collection. Everything else is noise. He reactivated the screen and kept reading. The $3,200 withdrawal had cleared through a single point-of-sale transaction. The merchant code mapped to a category he recognized immediately: luxury goods, watches, and jewelry. The specific merchant ID resolved. After 2 minutes of cross-referencing through his SEC consulting access to Reinhold & Carr Timepieces, a boutique on Newbury Street in Boston. The store carried 3 primary brands. The entry-level price point for any of the 3 was $1,100. The top-end pieces ran close to $4,000, $3,200. He opened a new tab and navigated to the boutique's online catalog. He found what he was looking for in 40 seconds, a Breitling Navitimer automatic. Steel case, brown calfskin strap. Retail price $3,195 plus tax, the kind of watch that announces a certain kind of man to other men of the same kind. I am serious about my money, and I want you to know it without me having to say it. He closed the tab. He sat in the narrow room with the October light pressing against the single window, and he thought about Connor Bryce. Connor Bryce worked 3 floors above Elliot in the building on Atlantic Avenue, where Elliot occasionally kept an office for his consulting work. They had met at a firm event 14 months ago, one of those quarterly things where the compliance department served warm Prosecco in plastic flutes, and everyone stood in calculated clusters pretending the evening was voluntary. Connor was from the brokerage side of the building, a mid-level relationship manager who handled a book of private wealth clients in the range of 2 to 10 million in managed assets. He was tall, with the particular brand of confidence that comes from having been told you were exceptional by enough people over enough years that you begin treating it as a fixed fact of the universe, rather than a provisional opinion. He and Vivian had met at that same event, Elliot understood now. He understood it because he was very good at sequencing timelines, and when he mapped backwards from the watch purchase to the firm event, to the specific moments over the past 14 months when Vivian had seemed slightly further away than usual, the sequence assembled itself with the quiet mechanical precision of a combination lock clicking into place. He kept his face neutral. He had been keeping his face neutral for so long that the skill had become automatic. The way a surgeon keeps steady hands through a procedure that would disturb an ordinary person. He closed the banking app. He picked up his coffee mug and walked back into the kitchen and refilled it. And when Vivian emerged from the bedroom 20 minutes later, in the oversized gray sweatshirt she wore on weekend mornings, her dark hair pressed flat on one side from sleep, he said good morning, the way he always said good morning, without particular warmth and without particular coldness. The level tone of a person in a long relationship who has passed the stage of manufactured morning enthusiasm. She said good morning back. She made herself a cup of tea. She stood at the counter scrolling through her phone with the casual comfort of someone who feels entirely safe in a space. And Elliot watched her from the corner of his field of vision and thought, how long has this been the performance? He said nothing. He asked her nothing. He had spent his career understanding that the worst thing you can do when you have discovered a financial crime, or any other kind of crime, is to announce the discovery prematurely. Every premature announcement is a gift to the other side. It gives them time to cover tracks, reframe narratives, delete records, call lawyers. The person who speaks first in these situations is almost always the person who loses. Elliot did not intend to speak first. He intended to build the architecture of what had happened in its entirety before he said a single word to anyone directly implicated in it. Over the following 4 days, working in the narrow second bedroom with the door closed and the sound of Vivian moving through the apartment behind the door, he began what he would later think of as the audit. He was methodical in the way that years of forensic work had made him methodical, not meticulous in the neurotic sense, but precise in the architectural sense. Each piece of information placed in exact relationship to the pieces surrounding it. The whole structure accumulating clarity the way a photograph develops in a dark room, slowly, region by region. He started with what he knew. The $3,200 withdrawal. The watch, Connor Bryce. The approximate start date of whatever this was. 14 months ago, the firm event, the October timeline. He worked outward from there. The joint account history went back 4 years, the length of the relationship. He ran it through a simple ledger model, not sophisticated, just a side-by-side of expected contributions versus actual balances against the standard withdrawal pattern they had established over the first 2 years together. In the 3rd year, which was to say beginning approximately 16 months ago, the pattern shifted. Small withdrawals, individually unremarkable, began appearing at a slightly elevated frequency. ATM cash withdrawals of $300. Restaurant charges at places he had never been to and she had never mentioned. A hotel charge in Providence for a single night in March. A Tuesday in March, when she had told him she was at a conference in Hartford. The Providence Hotel. He looked up the hotel. He found it without difficulty. A boutique property in the Wayland Square neighborhood, known in Providence circles for its restaurant and its privacy policies toward guests. He noted the charge date, cross-referenced it against his own calendar, and found that the Tuesday in March corresponded to a day he had been in New York for a client meeting. He had taken an early train and returned late. She had the apartment to herself from 6 in the morning until nearly 11 at night. She had not been in the apartment. He kept working. He pulled his own financial records next. Not the joint account, but his individual accounts, the consulting invoices, the LLC through which he ran his freelance work. He was not looking for anything specific here. He was establishing the full landscape before narrowing his focus, the way a forensic examiner surveys an entire financial system before drilling into the specific anomaly. You need the context. Without context, a single anomalous transaction can mean 100 different things. With full context, it means exactly one thing. It was on the 5th day of the audit, during a 3-hour session that began at 11:30 at night and ended just before 3 in the morning, that Elliot found the LLC. It was not his LLC. The entity was registered as Ashworth Venture Consulting LLC, filed with the Massachusetts Secretary of State 9 months prior. The registered agent was Vivian Ashworth. The stated business purpose was Management Consulting and Strategic Advisory Services. The registered address was a mail forwarding service on Tremont Street, a 2-room office that rented mailboxes to dozens of small businesses that had no physical presence. Vivian did not work in consulting. She was an event coordinator for a mid-sized hospitality company in the Seaport District. Her professional background was entirely unrelated to management consulting or strategic advisory work. He found the LLC's bank account through a series of document requests that were, technically, beyond what he could access without a formal engagement. He was aware of this and did not particularly care. He was not building a case for a court yet. He was building a picture for himself, and the methodology of building a picture for yourself has no evidentiary rules. The bank account had received 9 wire transfers over 9 months. Each wire originated from a different source entity, different LLCs, different holding companies, different corporate structures. The amounts varied: $4,500, $6,200, $3,800, $11,000, $4,500 again, $7,300, $5,500, $9,100, $8,400. Total incoming, $60,300. He sat with that number for a moment. $60,300. Accumulated over 9 months through 9 separate wires from 9 separate originating entities. He noted that the originating entities had varying names but a consistent geographic pattern, all registered in states with favorable corporate formation laws, all structured to require minimal disclosure. He pulled the originating entities one by one. It took him until the following night to trace all 9 source wires back to a single beneficial owner. The structure was layered. 3 of the 9 wires went through 2 intermediate entities before arriving in Vivian's LLC account, but the beneficial owner resolution was unambiguous once you had the full map. Connor Bryce. All 9 wires, through various corporate intermediaries, originated from a personal holding company registered in Delaware under Connor Bryce's name. Bryce Capital Holdings, LLC. The holding company had been formed 11 months ago, 1 month before Vivian's LLC. Elliot did not react. He wrote the name on the lined notepad he kept beside his laptop and underlined it once. Then he set down the pen and looked at the wall for approximately 90 seconds, organizing the information into its proper structure. What he had was this: Connor Bryce, a relationship manager at a brokerage firm managing private wealth client accounts in the range of $2 to $10 million, had established a personal holding company and had been making monthly payments to a consulting LLC controlled by Elliot's girlfriend of 4 years. The payments totaled $60,000 over 9 months. There was no plausible, legitimate explanation for these payments. Vivian had no consulting expertise relevant to wealth management, and the payments were structured to obscure their origin. In Elliot's professional world, this pattern had a name. It was called layering. It was one of the 3 stages of money laundering: placement, layering, integration, and it was specifically the stage at which illegally obtained funds are moved through a series of financial transactions to obscure their origin. The pattern he was looking at, 9 wires from 9 originating entities, all tracing back to a single source, deposited into a nominally legitimate LLC, was a textbook layering scheme. The question was, where was the money coming from before it reached Connor Bryce's holding company? He knew where to look because he had done this before. He had spent 5 years helping the SEC trace exactly this kind of fund flow. He knew the documentary trail that large-scale money movement leaves behind even when the person moving it is careful. And Connor Bryce, he was already certain, was not particularly careful. Careful people did not name their holding companies after themselves. Careful people did not use the same LLC for 9 months in the same jurisdiction with the same beneficial owner structure. Careful people understood that the more elegant the scheme appears on the surface, the more exposure it creates at the foundation. Connor Bryce was not careful. Connor Bryce was confident. And confidence, in Elliot's experience, was the most expensive substitute for competence that a person could buy. He began pulling the thread on Bryce Capital Holdings. What he found: over the following week, 7 days of work conducted in the narrow second bedroom, while Vivian moved through the apartment believing he was absorbed in a consulting project, which he was, simply not the one she imagined, was a scheme that had been running for approximately 18 months. The core mechanism was not complex. Connor managed discretionary accounts, meaning he had authority to execute trades on behalf of clients without requiring client approval for each individual transaction. This was standard in private wealth management for clients who had agreed to a discretionary mandate. It required a high degree of trust and was subject to significant regulatory oversight precisely because of the power imbalance it created. Connor had been abusing the discretionary authority, specifically across 11 client accounts. Connor had been executing small, irregular fund transfers to a set of external accounts at the point of settlement. The transfers were small enough, ranging from $800 to $4,500 per transaction, to avoid triggering the automated surveillance systems that flagged larger anomalies. The timing was irregular, which further disrupted pattern detection. Over 18 months and approximately 240 separate transactions across 11 accounts, the total siphoned amount was $2,314,800. $2,314,800. Elliot looked at that number for a long time. He let it sit on the page the way you let a large piece of furniture sit in a room before deciding whether it belongs, considering its dimensions, its weight, its relationship to everything around it. He had seen larger schemes. He had seen smaller ones that destroyed lives more efficiently. The number itself was not remarkable. What was remarkable was the clean simplicity of it. One relationship manager, 11 accounts, 240 transactions, 18 months, and then the money moved through a Delaware holding company and into a consulting LLC controlled by a woman who had no idea, or every idea, depending on which version of events you chose to believe. He had to decide which version he believed. He considered the question the way he considered all questions of this type, structurally, without feeling. The structural question was, what did Vivian know, and when did she know it? She had a consulting LLC receiving payments from Connor's holding company. She had opened the LLC 1 month after the holding company was formed. The timing suggested coordination. The absence of any consulting services being rendered, he had found no contracts, no deliverables, no correspondence suggesting actual work product, suggested the LLC existed purely as a receiving vehicle. If you are receiving money from a layering scheme without providing any services, you are either a beneficiary who is knowingly participating or a beneficiary who has been told a convenient story and has chosen not to ask inconvenient questions. Both versions had legal exposure. The law does not require full knowledge of a scheme to establish aiding and abetting liability. It requires only that you took an action that facilitated the scheme and that you had reason to know the action was improper. Vivian had opened a company, provided no services, and received $60,000. She had reason to know. Elliot closed his laptop. He stood up from the desk and stretched his back and walked to the window and looked out at the street below, where a delivery truck was idling in the amber cast of a streetlight. Its hazard lights blinking in the quiet, steady rhythm of something that needed to be somewhere else. He watched it for a moment. Then he went to the kitchen and made himself a cup of tea. He rarely drank tea, but there was something about 3 in the morning that made coffee feel wrong. And he stood at the counter in the dark and thought about what he was going to do with what he knew. This was the part that people who had never done forensic work misunderstood. They imagined that discovery was the end point, that once you knew the full picture, the response was obvious, the path was clear. In his experience, discovery was the beginning. The response required strategy, and strategy required patience, and patience required you to stop feeling whatever you were feeling and start calculating. He was not going to march into the bedroom and confront Vivian. That was the reaction, and reactions were expensive. He was not going to call a lawyer that night. Lawyers had their role, but lawyers entered the picture at the right moment, not the first available moment. He was going to be precise, and precision required a few more things that he did not yet have. He needed Connor Bryce's travel schedule. He knew from the expense reports submitted through the firm, which he had accessed through his consulting relationship with the compliance department, that Connor was a frequent traveler. Client visits, conferences, periodic trips to New York and San Francisco to meet with the wealth management divisions of correspondent banks. The schedule was predictable in its irregular way. Connor generally traveled once or twice a month, usually for 2 to 4 nights. He also knew, from a detail so small that a less attentive person would have lost it entirely, that Vivian had told him 2 weeks prior that she was planning to take a few days off in early November. She had said she needed a break. She had used the word decompress. She had described, vaguely, the idea of going somewhere quiet, somewhere near the water. She had not said who she was going with. He had not asked. He had filed the information in the part of his mind where he kept things that were not yet actionable and waited for them to become actionable. He pulled Connor's expense report submissions from October. There was a hotel reservation confirmation attached to an October expense pre-authorization, a standard process at the firm for travel booked more than 2 weeks in advance. The confirmation was for a property on the Maine coast. 4 nights beginning November 4th. Single occupancy declared on the expense report, which would be relevant later. The property was a place called Birch Head Inn, a 14-room inn on a promontory overlooking the Atlantic in a town called Tennant's Harbor. The price point in the range of $480 to $620 per night. Vivian was taking a few days off in early November, near the water. The 4th of November was a Wednesday. He looked at his notepad for a moment, then set it down and finished his tea. The following morning, which was a Thursday, he went to his office, not the one in the shared building on Atlantic Avenue, where Connor also worked, but his own office. A rented room on the 4th floor of a building in the Leather District that he used for his SEC consulting work. It was a small room, a desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, a window that looked at a brick wall 6 feet away. He had worked in this room for 4 years. He kept almost nothing personal in it. On the desk was a small photograph of his mother taken at a harbor in Nova Scotia. And beside it, a legal pad, and beside that, a pen. The rest was files. He sat down at the desk and opened his laptop and navigated to the SEC's whistleblower portal. The SEC whistleblower program had been established under the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, specifically Section 21F. The mechanics were straightforward. An individual with original information about a securities law violation could submit that information to the SEC, and if the resulting enforcement action led to sanctions exceeding $1 million, the whistleblower was entitled to between 10 and 30% of the total sanctions collected. The information had to be original, meaning it could not be information already known to the SEC through other channels, and the submission had to be voluntary, meaning the individual could not be compelled to submit by subpoena or other legal process. Elliott's information was original. He had developed it independently, through his own investigative work. Townpoint, without any prior contact with the SEC in the context of this specific matter. His existing consulting relationship with the SEC did not disqualify him from the whistleblower program. He had confirmed this through the program's own published guidance, provided that the information being submitted was outside the scope of his existing engagement. It was entirely outside the scope of his existing engagement. He spent the next 3 hours composing the submission. He was meticulous because he was always meticulous, but he was also strategic in a way that extended beyond mere accuracy. A whistleblower submission was not simply a disclosure of facts. It was a document designed to accomplish a specific outcome, and the quality of that outcome depended on how clearly and compellingly the document presented both the evidence and its significance. He organized the submission in the structure the SEC preferred: a narrative overview of the scheme, followed by transaction-by-transaction mapping of the misappropriated funds, followed by a documentation appendix containing the supporting records, followed by a brief analysis of the regulatory violations and their scope. He identified the 11 client accounts by their account numbers without naming the clients. The SEC would identify the clients themselves during the investigation. He mapped all 240 transactions to their corresponding account activity. He traced the fund flow from the client accounts through Connor's personal holding company, through the intermediate LLCs, to Vivian's Consulting LLC. He included the wire confirmations, the corporate registration documents, the expense report records, and a summary timeline. He did not include his personal relationship to any of the parties. That was not relevant to the submission, and its inclusion would have complicated the review process unnecessarily. When he was finished, he read the submission 3 times, once for content, once for clarity, once for anything that might later be characterized as speculation rather than evidence. He found 2 sentences in the narrative section that crossed that line and rewrote them. Then he submitted the document through the portal and noted the case reference number that the system generated automatically. He closed the portal and sat for a moment in the small room looking at the brick wall through the window. The submission would go through an initial review by the SEC's Office of the Whistleblower. If the office determined the information was credible and potentially actionable, it would refer the matter to the Enforcement Division. The Enforcement Division would conduct its own investigation. These processes took time, often many months, sometimes more than a year. The whistleblower program did not move quickly because it was not designed to move quickly. It was designed to move correctly. Elliot was not concerned with pace. He was concerned with architecture. He picked up his phone and called his attorney. Not a criminal defense attorney, not a securities litigator, but the estate and family law attorney he retained for personal matters. A precise woman named Harriet Sohn, who had handled the restructuring of his mother's estate 3 years ago, and who had, in that process, demonstrated a quality Elliot valued above all others in legal counsel. She never asked questions whose answers she did not actually need. He told Harriet that he was dissolving a joint financial arrangement and needed to understand the fastest and cleanest way to execute the separation of a joint savings account and a jointly held renter's insurance policy in a situation where he would not be seeking to recover funds that had already been withdrawn. Harriet asked 2 questions. Was there a joint tenancy on any real property? No. Were there any pending joint financial obligations beyond the accounts? Only the renter's insurance. She told him to come in on Monday. He said he would. He called his bank next and requested a form to remove Vivian as a co-holder on the joint account. The form could be submitted online with both parties' signatures or in person with one party's signature and appropriate documentation. He noted the in-person option. He called his building's management office and arranged, under the pretense of a standard annual review, to have his lease restructured. The lease was currently in both names. He asked whether it was possible to modify the lease to a single occupant agreement. The property manager said it depended on whether both parties agreed or whether one party was vacating. Elliot said one party was vacating and that he would provide proper written notice within the standard 30-day period. The property manager said that was fine and asked him to email the request. He said he would follow up the following week. He made these calls in the small office with the brick wall view, his voice level and businesslike, the way it was when he was on professional calls about professional matters, which was what this was. He was not cold in the theatrical sense. He was not performing coldness the way people perform emotion when they want to project a particular image of themselves. He was cold in the way that a very precise piece of machinery is cold, not because it lacks heat at its core, but because all its heat is directed inward, toward function, and nothing is wasted on surface temperature. He returned to the apartment that evening at 7. Vivian was cooking. She cooked on Thursdays, a habit she had maintained throughout the 4 years. Some kind of pasta, usually, the apartment filling with the smell of garlic and olive oil and the sound of the specific jazz playlist she put on when she cooked. He set his bag down and changed out of his work clothes and came to the kitchen and stood at the counter and watched her cook. And she told him about her day. A venue walkthrough had gone wrong. The caterer for a November event was renegotiating on 3 line items. The usual low-grade friction of her work. And he listened and said the appropriate things and ate the pasta she served and poured them both a glass of wine, and thought, while doing all of this, about the architecture of the next 3 weeks. He needed them to take the trip. This was the most important element of the strategy, the one he had thought through most carefully over the previous 2 days. He needed Connor and Vivian to leave the city together, to execute the trip they had planned, to be physically away from their respective professional environments and legally removed from the networks that might otherwise allow them to respond quickly to a developing situation. A person facing regulatory inquiry who is sitting at their desk surrounded by colleagues and legal resources is a very different problem from a person facing regulatory inquiry who is 4 hours from the city in a 14-room inn on the Maine coast with limited cell signal and no professional support structure within reach. He needed them gone, which meant he needed to behave for the next 3 weeks with complete normality. He had never found this particularly difficult. Tituaitu. He had been behaving normally in the apartment for 4 years while doing work that the average person would find extremely difficult to bring home. Reviewing evidence of financial crimes, tracing the movement of stolen money, building the case histories that led to enforcement actions and sometimes to prison sentences. The work required a compartmentalization that had become, over time, structural. It was not that he turned the work off when he came home. It was that the work and the home occupied different chambers of the same mind, sealed from each other not by effort but by habit. He could maintain normality for 3 more weeks. It was not even a challenge. What he thought about, more than normality, more than the practical sequence of events, was the money. Specifically, the number he had written on the notepad and then folded and placed in the filing cabinet in his office. $2,314,800, the total of Connor's misappropriation from the 11 client accounts. Under the SEC whistleblower program, if the enforcement action resulted in sanctions, which it would, given the quality and completeness of the documentation he had submitted, and if those sanctions exceeded $1 million, which they would, comfortably, he was entitled to between 10 and 30% of the total sanctions. The SEC had significant discretion in determining the percentage within that range. The factors they considered included the significance of the information submitted, the extent to which the whistleblower's assistance contributed to the enforcement action, and whether the whistleblower had participated in the misconduct. On all 3 factors, Elliott's position was strong. The information he had submitted was comprehensive and original. His assistants had effectively built the entire case, and he had no involvement in the misconduct. Conservative estimate, 15% of $2.3 million in sanctions, $345,000. Optimistic estimate, 22%, $509,000. He was a precise person, and he preferred conservative estimates, but even the conservative number changed the shape of his next 2 years in a way that was worth noting. He noted it. He also noted, with the flat clarity of a person who had resolved something he had not articulated to himself until that moment, that the $3,200 from the joint account, the money she had taken for the watch, for the man in the building on Atlantic Avenue, for the trip to Maine that she was planning to take while telling Elliot some version of the story she would tell herself was necessary, that money was not the injury. The money was a symbol. He was not angry about the money. He was precise about it, the way you are precise about the first domino in a sequence. You do not hate the domino. You simply appreciate its position. The days passed. The apartment maintained its rhythms. Vivian confirmed her days off in November, the 5th through the 8th, she told him. She was going to visit a friend from college who had moved to Portland, Maine. She offered this information at dinner on a Tuesday. Casual. The way you announce a minor plan to someone you live with. Elliot said that sounded like a good break. He asked if her friend was someone he had met. She said no. A college friend. Someone she had drifted apart from and was trying to reconnect with. He said that was nice. He said nothing else. On October 28th, FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, which governed broker-dealer conduct and had direct oversight authority over Connor's professional activities and licensing, received a separate, parallel disclosure. This was Elliott's second filing, submitted 2 weeks after the SEC submission. The FINRA disclosure was shorter, more targeted, focused specifically on the conduct violations relevant to Connor's broker license rather than the broader securities fraud angle covered in the SEC submission. FINRA moved faster than the SEC. Their surveillance unit was smaller, more nimble, designed to respond to time-sensitive situations involving licensed individuals who were actively managing client assets. He had timed the FINRA submission deliberately. The SEC submission needed time to process through the initial review stage. Filing it too close to the trip would risk the review arriving at the investigation stage while Connor was still in the city. The FINRA submission, filed later, would generate a faster response, but the timeline was still likely to extend beyond the November 4th through 8th travel window. He was building a mechanism, not a trap. A trap snaps shut at a specific moment. A mechanism operates continuously, each component in sequence, the whole structure rolling forward on its own momentum once you have properly aligned the parts. By the 1st of November, both submissions were in progress. The SEC reference number had received an automated acknowledgement indicating that the submission had passed initial review and been referred to the Enforcement Division. The FINRA submission had received a confirmation of receipt. He did not hear from either agency again before the trip. He had not expected to. On the evening of November 3rd, Vivian packed a bag. He watched her do it from the doorway of the bedroom. She did not invite him to watch. He simply happened to be there, leaning against the frame with his coffee mug, and she did not send him away. She packed with the specific efficiency of someone accustomed to packing for travel, folding things carefully, placing shoes in bags, rolling the items that wrinkle. She had always been good at packing. He had noticed this early in the relationship and found it attractive in the way that a very particular competence in a very small domain can be attractive. She was packing a dress he had not seen before. Dark green, some kind of silk, clearly not new enough to have tags but recently acquired. He would have remembered the dress if it had been in the apartment for longer than a few weeks. She folded it with particular care, more care than she gave the other items, and placed it on top. He said, "The weather up there is going to be cold. You might want a heavier layer over that." She said, "I have a jacket." He said, "Right." She zipped the bag. In the morning she was gone before he woke up. He heard the door close at 6:40. A sound he had catalogued among the thousands of small sounds that make up the texture of a life shared with another person. The specific weight of that door against its frame, the particular pressure of the latch engaging. He lay still for a moment in the bed and listened to the apartment's silence, which was different from the silence of a space that had never had another person in it. It was the silence of a space that had been emptied, which is heavier and more specific. He got up. He made coffee. He showered. He dressed. He drove to Birchhead Inn, not to confront them. He was not a person who confronted. He drove to Tennant's Harbor because he had one remaining task that required physical proximity, and he preferred to execute it himself rather than delegate it to a delivery service. Delegating it meant one more chain of custody, one more potential link that could be traced or questioned later. The drive was 4 hours and 20 minutes on a clear November morning, the highway giving way to county roads that curved between bare-limbed trees and the occasional cleared field where the Atlantic appeared on the horizon like something accidental, silver and enormous, not quite matching any picture of it he had held in his mind. He stopped once for gas and coffee at a station outside Brunswick, standing in the parking lot in the cold with the paper cup warming his hand, watching a dog in the back of a pickup truck in the adjacent bay observe the world with the flat patience of a creature that has learned to exist entirely in the present moment. He arrived in Tennant's Harbor at 11:15. The town was small enough to have no ambiguity. One main road, Satu, a harbor, a post office, a general store, and the inn, which sat on the promontory exactly as the photographs had shown it. A long, white building with black shutters, a porch facing the water, flagstone paths between the lawn and the water's edge where the grass was brown and pressed flat by the season. He did not go to the inn. He parked on the main road, outside the post office, and went inside. He had prepared the envelope the evening before, at the desk in his office on the 4th floor, in the quiet of 11 at night. It was a standard white envelope, unadorned, sealed. Inside was a single card, heavy stock, unprinted. He had bought a box of them years ago for professional correspondence and kept them in the desk drawer. On the card, in his handwriting, which was small and even and had been described once by a colleague as the handwriting of a person who has decided exactly how much space each letter deserves. Thank you for giving me the clarity to see what needed to be done. I hope Maine is everything you imagined. He had signed it. Elliot. He had addressed the envelope to both of them, their names written together the way you write names on a card when you are acknowledging a couple. He had included no return address. He handed the envelope to the postal worker and asked to have it held for local delivery to Birch Head Inn that afternoon. The postal worker looked at the address and said she knew the place. She could have it there by 2. He said that was perfect. He thanked her. He drove back to Boston. He stopped again at the gas station outside Brunswick, not because he needed anything, but because the drive was long and the coffee had been reasonably good. He stood in the same parking lot, in the same November cold, and drank a second cup. And thought about the card arriving at the inn's front desk and the front desk calling the room, and the moment one of them, it did not matter which one, read what was written on it and understood or did not understand what it meant, and what the not understanding would feel like in the body when the understanding arrived later. He drove home. The apartment without Vivian's things in it, without her shoes by the door and her jacket on the hook, and the small bottle of vitamins on the kitchen counter, and the paperback she was halfway through on the coffee table, was very quiet. He made himself dinner, something simple, and ate it at the kitchen table, reading a brief from the Enforcement Division on an unrelated matter. And when he was done, he washed the plate and put it away, and went to the second bedroom and opened his laptop. He had one more thing to do. He opened the joint savings account on the banking portal. He initiated the process he had prepared with Harriet Soane's guidance, a removal of the secondary account holder, effective in 3 business days pending the standard confirmation period, combined with a transfer of the remaining balance, $8,061, to his individual checking account. The transfer was processed immediately. The removal of the secondary holder would complete on Wednesday. He logged out of the portal. He looked at the wall for a moment. Then he opened a new document and began drafting the lease modification request for the Property Management Office. The following morning, Saturday, he was back in his office in the Leather District, working on the unrelated enforcement brief, when his phone showed a call from a number he did not recognize, area code 207, which was Maine. He looked at the number for a moment, then set the phone face down on the desk and continued reading the brief. The call went to voicemail. He did not listen to the voicemail that morning. He listened to it in the early evening, on the walk from his office to the parking lot. Vivian's voice was not raised. He had half expected raised, half expected the specific pitch of someone who has received a shock and is processing it through volume. Instead, she was quiet. Quiet. In the way that people are quiet when they have understood something fully and are not yet certain what the next sentence should be. Her voice had the texture of a person choosing every word with the deliberateness of someone who knows the words are being recorded. She said his name. She said she had received his card. She said she did not understand what it meant. She said she wanted to talk when she got back. She paused for several seconds, long enough that the voicemail nearly cut off. And then she said, "I'm sorry." And then she hung up. He replayed it twice. Not because he needed to hear it again, but because he was analyzing the specific word she had chosen. Sorry, not I can explain. Not that's not what you think, not I was going to tell you. Sorry. A word that had conceded everything without specifying a single thing. He noted it. He did not call back. On Sunday afternoon, his phone showed a text from Connor Bryce's number, a number he had in his contacts from the professional context, 2 or 3 coordination messages about shared firm resources over the past year. The text said, "I think we should talk. Call me when you can." He read the text. He did not respond. He thought about Connor reading the card and the specific quality of that experience. A man who believes he has been conducting a very clean operation, receiving an envelope addressed in his partner's boyfriend's handwriting, opening a card that says, "I hope Maine is everything you imagined," sitting with the card in a room at an inn overlooking the Atlantic, trying to determine what Elliot Crane knew and how much danger that knowledge represented. The combination of arousal and dread that lives in the chest when you realize you have been observed. The specific cold of understanding that the person you underestimated was not, in fact, underestimating you. He put the phone in his pocket and went for a walk along the waterfront. The city on a November Sunday had a specific quality he found useful. Quieter than a weekday, more real than a Saturday. The streets carrying the particular human truth of people existing without performance. Oh, and heading to grocery stores and laundromats and parks with dogs, the ordinary traffic of ordinary life moving at its ordinary pace. He walked for an hour and 15 minutes along the harbor and back through the North End, and when he returned to the apartment he made a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table and read for 2 hours, and then went to bed. On Monday morning he met with Harriet Sohn. Her office was on the 15th floor of a building on State Street. A corner space with 2 windows that looked out over the financial district toward the harbor. She was small, with close-cut gray hair and reading glasses that she wore low on her nose, and that she removed entirely when she was making a point she wanted you to take seriously. She had a quality that Elliot had come to rely on over 3 years of professional engagement. She never expressed opinions about his personal life, and she never paused in the work to process the emotional dimension of whatever situation she was addressing. She was an instrument of precision, like him. He told her everything, calmly and sequentially, from the birthday money discovery to the LLC to the SEC and FINRA submissions to the card. He told her about Vivian's voicemail and Connor's text. He showed her the documentation. He had brought a small file, organized, tabbed, and she read it without comment, glasses on, turning pages with the steady, methodical pace of someone reading for meaning rather than comprehension. When she was finished, she set the file on the desk and removed her glasses. She said, "The whistleblower submissions complicate the lease and account separation in one specific way." He asked what way, or she said, "You don't want the defense to later characterize the lease and account separation as intimidation or evidence tampering if Vivian ends up as a respondent in the SEC enforcement action. The separation needs to happen through a process that's clearly documented as personal and financial rather than legal coercion." She paused. "Which it is, provided we document your rationale correctly." He asked how they documented correctly. She said, "We note the date of the discovery of the joint account withdrawal, the date of your decision to separate the financial arrangement, and the absence of any communication to Vivian about the SEC matter prior to the separation. The separation was a personal decision made in response to the personal betrayal, not the professional one. The professional disclosure had already been submitted before the separation was initiated. He said he had submitted the SEC filing on a Thursday. He had initiated the lease and account separation the following Monday. She said, "So the sequence is correct, provided we document it contemporaneously." He said, "I documented it contemporaneously." She said, "Of course you did." She replaced her glasses and pulled a fresh legal pad from her drawer and began outlining the steps. The joint account separation would complete on Wednesday. The lease modification request was already in process and would be executed before the end of the month. The rental of a storage unit in his name, she recommended this as a clean way to facilitate the removal of Vivian's belongings without the messiness of a direct confrontation in the apartment, was something she could arrange through a firm she worked with regularly. He could provide the key. He said, "I'll handle the belongings directly." She looked at him over her glasses. She said, "I'd recommend against it." He said, "Noted." She said, "But you'll handle it directly." He said, "Yes." She said, "Then document the condition of every item before you move it. Photograph everything. Keep the list." He said he would. They concluded the meeting in 40 minutes. He thanked her, shook her hand, and left. Vivian returned on Tuesday evening. He heard her key in the lock at 7:15, the door opening, the specific weight of her bag being set down on the floor. Heavier than usual, the sound of it different. The way the weight a bag carries changes when the person carrying it has changed. He was in the kitchen making dinner. He did not go to the door. She came to the kitchen doorway and stood there. She was wearing the jacket she had taken, a dark navy peacoat he had bought her 2 winters ago, and her hair was loose, and she looked at him with the expression of a person who has spent several days preparing for a conversation, and now, standing at the threshold of it, finds that all the preparation has not made the conversation any less difficult. He set down the spoon he was holding and turned to look at her. He said, "You can get your coat off." She came into the kitchen and sat down at the table. She did not take off the coat immediately. She put her bag on the floor beside the chair and folded her hands on the table in a way that looked, to him, rehearsed, not falsely. But the way things look rehearsed when you have practiced them in your head so many times that the practice shows in the body. She said, "How much do you know?" He said, "Everything." She said, "The LLC." He said, "The LLC. The wires, the watch, Providence, the inn." She said his name, not as an address but as a sound, the kind of sound a person makes when they are acknowledging the full weight of something without being able to respond to it yet. She said, "I was going to tell you." He said, "When?" She said, "I don't know." She paused. "After I figured out how." He said, "How to tell me that you opened a company to receive money from a man who was stealing from his clients." She looked at him. He watched the sentence land. She said, "I didn't know that." He looked at her for a moment. He believed her, in the sense that he believed she had told herself a story, that the money was a gift, an investment, something that did not require examination. He believed she had chosen not to look too closely because not looking closely had been, for 9 months, extraordinarily comfortable. He believed she had told herself the story the way people tell themselves the stories that cost them the least. He said, "Your LLC received $60,000 from a man who was stealing $2.3 million from private clients. Whether you knew the source is a question the SEC will form their own opinion on." "Darndot?" She looked at him, and he watched the color go out of her face, not dramatically but in the slow, specific way that the face empties when it is redirected from emotion to fear. She said, "The SEC." He said, "I'm a forensic examiner. I have a consulting relationship with the Enforcement Division. What you and Connor did is exactly the kind of pattern I spend my professional life documenting. I didn't have a choice about reporting it." This was not entirely accurate. He had had a choice. He had also had a clear financial incentive to exercise the choice in the direction he had exercised it. But the choice itself, the direction of it, was something he had not had to deliberate over. The deliberation was only about timing and architecture, not about weather. She said, "When did you file?" He said, 3 weeks ago." She sat with that for a moment. He watched her count backwards. 3 weeks, which meant he had known for most of the time since his birthday. Which meant the card was not an impulse, but a conclusion. He watched her understand the sequence. She said, "The card." He said nothing. She said, "You sent us a card to tell us you knew. On the same day you filed with the SEC." He said, "I sent you a card because it was accurate. You gave me clarity. I am grateful for it." She looked at him, and he looked at her, and the kitchen was very quiet. The hiss of the burner under the pot, the only sound in the room. Yo. And outside the window, the street noise of the city carried on at its ordinary level, completely indifferent. She said, "You're not angry?" He said, "I'm extremely precise." She stood up from the table. She stood there for a moment, coat still on, hands at her sides, and he thought she might say something else, something that would change the shape of the conversation, something that would require him to respond differently, but she did not say anything else. She picked up her bag and walked out of the kitchen, and he heard her go into the bedroom, and he turned back to the stove and finished making dinner. He ate alone. He left a plate covered on the counter. She did not come out of the bedroom that night. In the morning she was gone before he was awake, the same as the morning she had left for Maine, the door closing with its specific weight. He got up and checked the bedroom. Her bags were on the bed, half packed. And the green dress was gone. She had already taken it. The rest would require another trip. He went to his office and worked. On November 14th, 10 days after the trip, 31 days after the initial SEC submission, he received a call from a supervisory special agent in the SEC's Boston Enforcement Office. The call lasted 22 minutes. The agent confirmed that the Enforcement Division had opened a formal investigation into the activities described in his submission. She did not provide specifics about the investigation's status or timeline, but confirmed that Elliott's submission had been registered under the whistleblower program, and that he would be notified of any enforcement outcome that met the threshold for a whistleblower award. He thanked her and ended the call. He noted the date in his log, November 14th, exactly 1 month after his birthday. The precision of this was not something he had planned, but he noted it anyway. The following week, Day 1, Connor Bryce was placed on administrative leave by the brokerage. This was reported in a brief item in a financial industry newsletter that tracked broker-dealer personnel changes, a publication that would be invisible to anyone not specifically following that industry, but that Elliott monitored as a standard professional practice. The item said only that Connor Bryce had been placed on administrative leave pending a compliance review, and that his client accounts had been reassigned to other relationship managers. He read the item once, noted it, and moved on. The week after that, he received a second call from Harriet Sohn, who had been in indirect contact through her network with the attorney representing Vivian on the SEC matter, an attorney Vivian had apparently retained quickly, which suggested either advanced preparation or very good instincts, and Elliott gave her credit for both. Harriet told him, carefully, and without characterizing the information as a recommendation, that Vivian's attorneys were exploring a cooperation arrangement with the SEC, meaning Vivian would provide testimony and documentation about the LLC and the wires in exchange for a negotiated resolution of her own exposure. This was standard practice in matters of this kind, and it was, Harriet noted, a very sensible path for Vivian to be taking. He said, "Noted." Harriet asked if he had any concerns about that approach. He said, "I have no concerns. Cooperating witnesses tend to accelerate enforcement timelines, which is good for the whistleblower outcome." Harriet was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're the only client I've had who approaches personal situations with the architecture of a fund settlement." He said, "I've found it useful." She said, "I know." She paused. "The storage unit is booked through the end of November. Do you want me to extend it?" He said, "No. Everything that needs to come out of the apartment will be out by then." She said, "All right." He thanked her and ended the call. By the end of November, the apartment had been restored to a single occupancy configuration. This was not as complicated as it might have been. He and Vivian had always maintained a certain distinctness in the domestic space. each of them resistant to the full merging of belongings that characterizes some long relationships. The separation of the material objects took 2 weekends, 2 trips with a rented van, and the assistance of a man from the storage company who helped carry the larger furniture pieces without asking anything about them. He kept the apartment. He had always been the one who wanted it, found it, negotiated the lease, decorated it with a spare and particular taste that Vivienne had occasionally described as cold and that he had thought of as considered. Without her things, the apartment looked more like itself, darker, quieter, the bookshelves redistributed to show their spines rather than stacked too deep, the kitchen counter clear of the small clusters of objects she had accumulated there. He bought a new coffee maker. The old one had been hers. December passed. He worked. He ran 3 mornings a week along the waterfront. He had dinner twice with his colleague from the enforcement division, and once with a friend from graduate school who was in the city for a conference. He called his mother on Sundays. She did not ask about Vivienne. She had never been warm toward Vivienne, never hostile, but not warm, and she had perhaps been calculating her own timelines in her own patient way. He did not think about Connor Bryce very often. When he thought about him, it was briefly and structurally, as a variable in a larger equation, a moving part in a mechanism whose other parts were progressing on schedule. He thought about Vivienne slightly more often, not with regret, but with the specific precision of a person cataloging a thing that is over. He thought about the apartment, and the 4 years and the texture of a life shared in close quarters with another person, the sounds and smells of it, the particular warmth of another body in a bed over 4 winters, the way she laughed when something actually surprised her, which was different from her social laugh. These were real things. He did not pretend they were not real things. He simply placed them in the category of things that were real and also over, which was a category he had some experience with. He did not miss her in the way that is supposed to make a person non-functional. So Brown. He missed her in the way that you miss a room you will not be returning to, with a precise awareness of its dimensions, its particular quality of light, and the specific way the air felt there at certain times of day. He moved forward. In January, the brokerage announced the termination of Connor Bryce's employment, again in the financial industry newsletter, this time with a slightly longer item that mentioned a regulatory inquiry without characterizing it further. Elliot read the item and noted it. In February, he submitted a supplemental documentation package to the SEC's Office of the Whistleblower, as the agent had indicated he might be asked to do during the November call. The package included additional records he had developed in the interim, confirming the beneficial ownership structure of several of the intermediate entities. The package was thorough, and the agent acknowledged receipt within 24 hours, which was faster than the standard acknowledgement timeline, and suggested active use of the information. In March, on a Tuesday evening, when he was in the office finishing a brief, his phone showed a text from Vivienne's number, a number he had not blocked but had not heard from since the November conversation in the kitchen. The text said, "It's mostly done. The cooperation agreement was signed last week. I wanted you to know." He read the text. He thought about what to say. He wrote, "Thank you for letting me know," and sent it, and set the phone down and went back to the brief. She did not respond. He thought about the thank you after he had sent it, its strange echo of the card, its accidental precision. He had not meant it as an echo, or perhaps he had. He was not always certain of the difference between intention and pattern. Spring came. The city adjusted its temperature and its light, and its population of people who had been moving through winter with their shoulders contracted against cold and could now walk normally again. He bought a jacket lighter than the one he had been wearing and went for longer runs along the waterfront, and occasionally sat on the bench at the end of the pier near his office building on Sunday mornings. Watching the harbor traffic and drinking coffee from the stand near the parking lot that made it too strong and charged too much for it, and that he had been buying from for 4 years. He was sitting on that bench on a Sunday in April when his phone rang with an 866 number, Federal Agency range, and he answered it. It was the supervisory special agent from the SEC's Boston Enforcement Office. She was calling to inform him that the Enforcement Division had issued a formal order of investigation and that the preliminary sanctions assessment in the matter exceeded the threshold for whistleblower award consideration. She wanted to confirm his address for correspondence purposes. He confirmed his address. She said, "The formal notification of the award determination will take several more months, pending completion of the enforcement action and collection of sanctions. But I wanted to let you know that the case is moving forward, and your submission has been designated as contributing to a significant enforcement action." He said, "Thank you for the update." She said, "We don't often see submissions that are this completely documented on arrival. It saved the enforcement team significant time." He said, "I've done a lot of this work. I understand what you need." She said, "It shows." He thanked her again and ended the call. He looked at the harbor for a moment. The flat silver water, the working boats, a container ship moving slowly across the middle distance in the direction of the outer harbor. He finished his coffee. The cup was still too strong, and the bench was still cold through his jacket, and the sky over the harbor was a pale, clear blue that held no warmth yet, but promised warmth. Too, the specific color of early spring in a northern city, when the temperature has committed to rising and is simply working through the logistics of it. He took out his phone and called his mother. She picked up on the second ring and said his name, and he said good morning, and she asked how he was, and he said he was well. She asked if he was eating properly. He said he was. She asked about the consulting work. He described the cases briefly. And, in general terms, she had always been interested in his work in a structural way, the mechanics of how a crime was built and dismantled without being particularly disturbed by the human dimension of it. They talked for 20 minutes, which was long for them. Before she hung up, she said, "You know what I always say." He said, "I know." She said, "The patient one always wins." He said, "I know, Mom." She said she loved him and hung up. He sat on the bench for a while longer. A group of college students passed on the path behind him, loud in the specific key of Saturday morning energy, and a dog on a leash paused to inspect the leg of the bench and was pulled away by its owner, and the container ship on the outer harbor continued its slow transit, indifferent to all of it. He thought about the thank you card, the card in the envelope, the postal worker in Tennant's Harbor who had delivered it that afternoon, the front desk at Birchhead Inn calling the room. Dowry. The card sitting on whatever surface they had set it on, in whatever state they had been in when they read it. He thought about the moment it arrived, which he had constructed carefully and delivered cleanly, and about everything that followed it, which had proceeded with the mechanical precision of a thing whose parts had been properly aligned. He did not feel satisfaction, exactly. Satisfaction implied that something was complete, and the enforcement action was not yet complete. The formal award determination would come later. The sanctions collection later still. The disposition of Vivian's cooperation matter in its own timeline. Nothing was complete. What he felt was something more specific than satisfaction and less theatrical than triumph. He felt the particular quiet of a person who has done the work correctly and knows it, who has built a thing that holds its weight, who has measured twice and cut once, and who is now waiting, without anxiety, for the structure to do what it was built to do. The harbor kept its pace. The spring light moved across the water the way light does when it is learning a surface again after a long winter. He sat there until his coffee was cold. Then he threw the cup away and walked back to the office. There was a brief waiting on his desk. He sat down and opened it. He began to read. 6 months later, a formal notification arrived from the SEC's Office of the Whistleblower. He was at his desk in the Leather District office when it arrived. A physical letter, sent to his registered address and forwarded to the office per his standing mail instruction, in a white envelope with the federal agency seal in the upper left corner. He opened it with a letter opener, the same one he had used for 4 years, its handle worn smooth at the exact point where his thumb rested. The letter confirmed the final sanctions total in the enforcement action: $4,820,000. The amount included disgorgement of the misappropriated client funds, plus prejudgment interest, plus civil penalties, the standard 3-component structure of an SEC enforcement sanction. The whistleblower award had been determined at 19% of the sanctioned amount. He did the arithmetic in the margin of the letter, not because he needed to, but because the act of writing the number out with his hand made it real in a way that the printed figure did not. 19% of $4,820,000, $915,800. He set the pen down. He looked at the figure for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and sent his mother a text, because calling her would have meant explaining the backstory. And the backstory was long, and the precise details of how you win a thing are less important to a mother than the fact that you won it. The text said, "The consulting project I've been working on this year settled today. Good outcome." She replied in 40 seconds, "I know." He looked at the text for a moment. He put the phone down. He folded the letter carefully along its original creases and placed it in the filing cabinet, in the drawer he reserved for matters that were resolved. He pulled a fresh legal pad from the desk drawer. He picked up his pen. He began working on the next brief,